Eleanor had not felt hope in 3 years. Then a man with sad eyes and a worn carpetbag walked into her boarding house, looking for his lost daughter. That single moment changed 2 broken lives forever.
Subscribe to Wild Sky Stories' new emotional tales every day.
The dust of Copper Creek, Arizona, had a way of settling into everything. Into the cracks of wooden porches, into the folds of Sunday dresses, and most certainly into the broken heart of Eleanor Hayes. She stood at the window of her small boarding house, watching the town move about its morning business. 3 years had passed since consumption took her husband Samuel. 3 years of running this 8-room establishment alone. 3 years of polite nods from townspeople who saw her as nothing more than the widow who changed their sheets and served their breakfast. Eleanor was 34 years old, and loneliness had become her most faithful companion. She turned from the window and smoothed her calico dress, preparing for another day of invisible existence. The boarding house had 4 guests currently: 2 minors, a traveling preacher, and a quiet schoolteacher named Margaret, who kept entirely to herself. Eleanor had learned not to expect friendship from her guests. They came, they paid, they left. She was merely part of the furniture to them. But today would bring someone different. The afternoon sun was brutal when the stranger walked through her door. He was perhaps 40 years old, with silver threading through his dark hair and eyes the color of river stones after rain. He carried a single carpet bag and moved with a slight limp that spoke of old injury. "Ma'am," he said, removing his hat, "I'm hoping you might have a room available. Name's Thomas Ashford." Then Ella noticed the wariness in his face, the kind that went deeper than tired muscles. This was a man carrying invisible weight. "I have a room on the 2nd floor," she said. $2 a week, breakfast included. "That would suit me fine." As she led him up the narrow staircase, she asked the question she always asked: "What brings you to Copper Creek, Mr. Ashford?" He paused at the top of the stairs. "I'm looking for someone." She waited, but he offered nothing more. She showed him to his room, a modest space with a brass bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking the dusty Main Street. "Supper's at 6 if you want it," she said. "That's extra." "I'll take supper," he said. "And Mrs. Hayes." She turned, surprised. He knew her name, then remembered she had not given it. "The sign outside," he explained. "Hayes Boarding House. I assumed," he explained. "Hayes Boarding House, I assumed." You assumed correctly. That evening, Eleanor served supper to her guests in the small dining room. The 2 minors talked loudly about a new vein they hoped to strike. The preacher read silently from his Bible. Margaret, the schoolteacher, ate quickly and excused herself early, as always. But Thomas Ashford lingered. "This is fine cooking, Mrs. Hayes," he said. "Reminds me of meals my mother used to make." Eleanor felt her cheeks warm. Compliments were rare currency in her world. "It's just simple food, Mr. Steward." "Styled us, Ashford." "Simple things are often the finest things," he replied. "May I ask, have you run this establishment long?" "Since my husband passed. 3 years now." "That's a considerable undertaking for one person." Eleanor began clearing plates. "I manage." Thomas stood and, to her complete surprise, began helping her gather dishes. "Allow me." "Ashford, you're a paying guest. You shouldn't. You have cleared many a table in my life," he said. "My mother ran a boarding house too, back in Missouri. I know what kind of work it takes." Eleanor felt something shift in her chest, a small loosening of the tight knot she had carried for so long. When had anyone last offered to help her with anything? Over the following days, Thomas Ashford became a puzzle Eleanor could not solve. He spent his mornings walking through town, asking quiet questions she could not hear. He took his meals at her table, and always helped clear dishes despite her protests. He asked her about her day, about the boarding house, about the town. No one ever asked Eleanor about her day. You said you were looking for someone. She ventured one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the Arizona sky in shades of amber and rose. It had become their habit, this evening sitting. Eleanor told herself it meant nothing, but she had begun looking forward to it more than she should. Thomas was quiet for a long moment. I'm looking for my daughter. Eleanor turned to him, seeing fresh pain in his eyes. Her name is Josephine. She would be 16 now. Her mother, my wife, died when Josephine was born. I raised her alone for 8 years, working as a ranch foreman in Texas. Then one day, I came home from the range and she was gone. Gone. Taken by her mother's sister. The woman had always wanted children and couldn't have her own. She simply took Josephine while I was working and disappeared. Eleanor's hand moved to her heart. How terrible. I've been searching for 8 years. I followed trails across 5 territories. 3 months ago, I received word that a woman matching her aunt's description settled somewhere in this region with a girl who would now be 16, and you believe they might be here in Copper Creek. I pray they are. I have spent 8 years praying. Eleanor looked at this man, this father who had never stopped searching for his child, and felt her heart open in a way she had not permitted in years. I'll help you, she said. I know everyone in this town. I know things that get said in my dining room. Gossip shared over breakfast. Let me help you find her. Thomas looked at her with such gratitude that Eleanor had to look away. Why would you do that for a stranger? Because, she said softly, I know what it is to have no one offer help when you desperately need it. The search brought them closer in ways Eleanor had not anticipated. They walked through town together, and she introduced him to shopkeepers and ranch hands. They shared information over evening meals, their heads bent together over the table after other guests had retired. The miners began to whisper. The preacher raised an eyebrow. Margaret, the schoolteacher, offered Eleanor a rare smile. One morning that seemed to say something Eleanor was not ready to hear. But Eleanor found she did not care about whispers. For the first time in 3 years, she had a purpose beyond survival. She had a friend. More than a friend, perhaps, though she dared not name it. It was Eleanor who finally found the answer, in the most unexpected of places. Margaret, the schoolteacher, who had been boarding with her for 2 months and had barely spoken 20 words, appeared at Eleanor's kitchen door one afternoon. Mrs. Barely spoken 20 words, appeared at Eleanor's kitchen door one afternoon. Hayes, she said quietly, I need to speak with you about your guest, Mr. Ashford. Eleanor felt her stomach tighten. What about him? Margaret stepped into the kitchen and closed the door behind her. I know who he's looking for. I know because... She paused, gathering courage. I know because the woman he seeks is my mother. And the girl he's looking for is me. Eleanor gripped the edge of her counter. What? My mother is not really my mother. She is my aunt. She took me from my father when I was 8 years old. She told me he had died. I believed her until I was 14 and found letters he had sent searching for me, letters she had hidden. By then, she was ill, and I could not leave her. She passed 6 months ago, and I came here to start fresh as a schoolteacher. Margaret, but my name is not Margaret. It never was. My name is Josephine Ashford, and the man staying under your roof is my father. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. He's been searching for you for 8 years. I know. Josephine's voice broke. I've been watching him since he arrived. I've been too afraid to speak. What if he hates me? What if he thinks I abandoned him? Eleanor crossed the kitchen and took the young woman's hands. Child, I have sat with that man every evening for 2 weeks. I have watched him speak of you with such love that it brings tears to my eyes. He has never stopped looking. He never stopped believing. Go to him. Go to him. But Josephine shook her head, fear clouding her features. I cannot. What would I say? How do I explain? Eleanor thought of all the years she had spent. Alone, all the words she had never spoken. All the chances she had never taken. All the chances she had never taken. She thought of Thomas and his riverstone eyes, his gentle hands clearing her dishes, his voice asking about her day, as if her answer truly mattered. You say the truth. Eleanor told her, you say it plain and simple, and you trust that love is stronger than years and silence and fear. You trust that the people who truly love us have room in their hearts for our imperfections. That evening, Eleanor asked Thomas to join her in the parlor after supper. He came, as he always did, expecting their usual conversation. Instead, he found Josephine waiting. Eleanor would never forget the sound Thomas Ashford made when he realized who stood before him. A sound somewhere between a cry and a prayer. 8 years of searching released in a single breath. Papa, Josephine whispered. Thomas crossed the room in 3 strides and gathered his daughter into his arms. They stood there weeping, holding each other as if the world might try to separate them again. Eleanor slipped quietly toward the door, giving them privacy, but Thomas's voice stopped her. Eleanor, please stay. She turned back, surprised by the use of her Christian name. You found her, he said, his voice thick with emotion. You gave me back my daughter. Please, stay. Eleanor remained in the doorway, watching father and daughter begin to heal the wounds of 8 stolen years. She watched and felt something bloom in her chest. Not loneliness, not grief, but hope. Over the weeks that followed, Eleanor watched Thomas and Josephine rebuild their relationship. They walked together, talked together, began to know each other again. Josephine continued teaching at the schoolhouse, but she no longer kept to herself. She began helping Eleanor with evening meals, and the boarding house filled with something it had lacked for 3 long years. Laughter. Thomas stayed on, though he no longer had reason to search. When Eleanor asked him why he remained, he gave her a look that made her breath catch. I came to Copper Creek looking for one person, he said. I found 2. Mr. Ashford. Thomas. He corrected gently. After all we've shared, I think you might call me Thomas. Thomas. She tried the name, found it fit her mouth like it belonged there. What are you saying? He took her hand, the first time he had touched her deliberately, and the warmth of his palm sent shivers through her entire body. I'm saying that I came here as a man with nothing but a prayer and a carpet bag. I'm saying that you showed me kindness when you owed me nothing. You helped me find my daughter. You gave me back my family, and somewhere along the way, Eleanor Hayes, you also gave me back my heart. Eleanor felt tears slip down her cheeks. I was just being a friend. You were being yourself, Thomas said. That's what captured me. Your strength, your grace, the way you run this boarding house with dignity, despite carrying your grief alone. The way you asked about Josephine every day, because you knew I needed to speak of her. The way you loo K at the sunset like it's the most beautiful thing you've ever seen, even though you've watched it set over this town 1,000 times. Thomas, I know it's soon. I know there are proper ways these things should be done. But I've spent 8 years searching for what I'd lost, and I've learned that time is precious. So I'm asking you, Eleanor, might I have permission to court you? To see if what I feel might be something we could build a future upon. Eleanor looked at this man who had walked into her boarding house, a stranger, and had become the answer to a prayer she had never dared to speak. She thought of the loneliness that had been her constant companion, and she felt it finally, blessedly beginning to release its grip. Yes, she whispered, yes, you may. The courtship was simple and sweet. They walked together, and the evenings sat on the porch watching sunsets, shared meals and stories, and dreams, and stories, and dreams. Josephine became the daughter Eleanor had never had, and Eleanor became the mother Josephine. Barely remembered, the town whispered, but the whispers were kind now. Whispers of happiness for the widow, who had finally found someone to share her burdens, and for the searcher who had found far more than he sought. On a spring morning 6 months later, Eleanor Hayes became Eleanor Ashford in a small ceremony at the Copper Creek Church. Josephine stood beside her as witness, and the miners and the preacher, and half the town crowded into the pews. As Eleanor spoke her vows, she thought of the woman she had been a year ago, lonely, invisible, convinced that her life would be nothing but work and survival until she finally joined Samuel in the ground. She had wanted just one friend. She had received so much more. That evening, Eleanor and Thomas sat on their porch now belonging to both of them, and watched the sunset paint the Arizona sky. "I keep thin, King, about what brought us here," Eleanor said softly, "about all the paths that had to cross. If your wife's sister hadn't come to this territory, if Josephine hadn't chosen my boarding house, if you hadn't followed that last lead." Thomas took her hand, intertwining their fingers in a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. "I've stopped wondering about the paths," he said. "I've decided to just be grateful they led me here." Eleanor leaned her head against his shoulder and watched the sun sink below the mountains, setting the world ablaze with color. She had spent 3 years learning to survive alone. Now, finally, she was learning to live. And as the stars emerged, one by one over Copper Creek, Eleanor Ashford understood that the friend she had wanted had become the family she had never dared to dream of, and the love she had thought was behind her forever had found its way home. She smiled, breathed deep of the clean Arizona air, and let herself believe that some stories, after all the heartache and searching and waiting, truly do find their way to happiness. This one certainly had.